Welcome to a special 5-part series where we dive into learning about ADHD. I'm joined by 5 successful female leaders who all have diagnosed ADHD. I'm deeply curious to understand their stories and to learn both how they've learned to thrive in a neurotypical world and how we as leaders can keep building cultures where people truly belong and reach their highest potential. I'm really excited. Today, Rebecca McLinden joins me. Hi, Beck.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Let me share a little bit about you first, and then we'll get going in our conversation. So, Beck is a late diagnosed ADHD woman in leadership at a disability organisation. Beck is a board certified behaviour analyst who's worked with people who are neurodivergent for over 16 years, supporting them, their loved ones and teams to learn new skills and to shape positive environments. Beck leads teams working in the field to practice in a neuroaffirmative and person-centred way. And Beck, I know that you are really passionate about building confidence in those with ADHD and helping people learn the skills to thrive. It's such a pleasure to have you here. For people who don't know you, haven't met you before, I'd love you to share with us kind of who are you as a human being? Let's get into your story.
Okay, so as a human, I guess I am from Liverpool in the UK. I moved to Australia in 2017. I've kind of always wanted to just experience new things. I've lived in other countries before. I'm someone who's kind of always seeking the next challenge. I'm the oldest sister of 5, 6, 7, 7 siblings.
Wow.
Yeah, so I have a large family. Some of those are neurodivergent as well, some of them neurotypical. So it's definitely an interesting mix. And I love that. Like, I love seeing my family. I love being a part of all of that. Something I miss, obviously, coming here. What else? I guess I love science. I've always loved learning. So I, got my degree. I went on to get a master's, and then I applied that kind of working with families. I think I come from a family who all have different helping professions, nurses, politicians, things like that. And I just wanted to carry that on and carry on kind of supporting people to, thrive.
Fantastic.
To
So there's
thrive and to do better.
always been a kind of deep caring theme.
Yeah,
So how did
always.
you tell us how your career got going, and where you've focused obviously supporting neurodivergent people for over 16 years. How did you get into that? What were the early stages of your career?
Well, my little brother has complex health needs, like very, very complex disabilities. He's got a list longer than my arm of disabilities and things that he needs. So when I was 16, I started working in his school just as a teaching assistant. I then transitioned into the autism specific class, which I absolutely adored. I just loved working with those kids and the families, and I enjoyed how every day was different. It was a different challenge. There was different wins. So then I went on to kind of get my psychology degree and a master's in applied behavior analysis. I was actually working in schools at the time of getting my master's degree, and I found that most days I called it Groundhog Day, because there would be these challenges. The next day, the same challenges would appear. And it just felt to me like nothing was really being done to help them learn new skills, to make the environment more positive. And it's not to say it wasn't a good school, it was, but I just didn't see any lasting change happening with the kids that I was working with. So I started investigating ways that I could do that with my psychology degree, and I stumbled across applied behavior analysis, and it seemed like a really science-driven way to build skills, to understand human behavior and to support people to have the skills that they need in life. So that's what I did. I did that. I worked with local families once I got my degree, supporting them in their homes, in their schools. We set up, or some parents in that region set up, like a voluntary-based therapy clinic where we would teach new people, because it wasn't very known, that type of therapy in the UK. So we would support volunteers doing their psychology degrees to kind of learn about how we can support people with autism and to apply that therapy. And in the UK, like I said, it wasn't very big then. So I moved to Australia, where there is kind of therapy clinics, allied health clinics, and there is a lot more funding for support. And so, yeah, I moved here, worked as a behaviour analyst, and then eventually found myself in leadership.
Fantastic. So, we shared in the intro that you received a late diagnosis. So center ourselves there for a minute and tell us, how did that all come about?
So it was, I guess I moved over to Australia, and then I've always kind of struggled with anxiety, panic attacks, things like that. And when I moved over to Australia and I came into that leadership position, I changed from working directly with customers and clients and families to more in that leadership position. And my role changed, of course. And I found myself really struggling, and I kept accounting it to, oh, it's just work is busy. But then it was bleeding into my real life, like my time at home, my real life, my time at home, my social life. I was just starting to see that I was struggling more and more every day. And I always tell this story of when one time my partner had done all of my washing, he'd done all of the chores for that day, he put the folded up clean clothes on my bed, and I burst out crying because there was something in my mind that was just stopping me from picking up the clothes and putting them in the wardrobe. 2-minute task, 2 minutes it would have taken, but I just couldn't fathom the idea of having to do that. It was like akin to someone saying, put your hand in the fire. Like physically you can, but my mind wouldn't let me. So I obviously then was like, I probably need to see someone and figure out what's going on. And I did. It was COVID. So I managed to get a psychiatry appointment relatively quickly. I had the assessments, and yeah, within a few sessions, he diagnosed me with ADHD. And then everything was a huge realization. Like I looked back on my whole life, everything that I'd struggled with, the anxiety, the panic attacks and everything like that. And I realized it has always been present. The thing that triggered me to look at it differently was that I'd been pulled out of my support network. I changed my role. So all of the usual things I did to mask ADHD or to cope with ADHD had changed, and I had to quickly learn new strategies. And yeah, I only had, well, my friends and my partner obviously to help me, but it was very different to my family being around me and supporting me with things I hadn't even realized they'd been supporting me with.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned COVID was part of it as well. And
Yeah.
I guess I'd love your perspective on this. Like, and I've been completely upfront with you that this is a new world to me. It's not, I don't have a good understanding, hence us having all of these conversations, because I suspect a lot of people don't. It seems like we have seen a lot more females, late diagnosis, and particularly through that COVID period. Is that true, or are we just seeing more high-profile people talk about it? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think it's a combination of lots of things. For me personally, in COVID, I think I had a lot more forced time with myself. So a lot more time where I wasn't kept busy by social engagements, work, all these other things. Like I was forced to be with myself and kind of unmask by accident and see like how like my typical strategies for getting through day to day were not applicable anymore. And so for me, the symptoms became more apparent, or the traits became more apparent. I think in terms of more people being diagnosed, I think there's a lot more understanding of it. Even though I'd worked with neurodivergent people since I was 16, I did not recognize that in myself. To me, I'd only ever really seen it in young boys, adult boys, and young girls, and very rarely in young girls. So I didn't have exposure into what ADHD looked like in adulthood. I do think that there is a lot more exposure into that, more high profile people talking about it, like you said. I think there's more of an acceptance that it's not just a childhood diagnosis anymore, more research going into it, and therefore more people are starting to realize, oh, that actually sounds like me. They're seeing it more and they're like, you know, maybe I should go and get a diagnosis for this, and maybe it will help explain the struggles I've had in life.
What are the numbers? Like, I saw a statistic the other day that talked about 1 in 20 Australians. Like, is that genuine?
I mean, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head. They're changing all the time. And, you know, research is typically a few years old sometimes. So you'll see different statistics for different countries. But both autism and ADHD have definitely increased. And that number doesn't surprise me. And even when I look at my own personal friend group, there's at least 3 or 4 of us who have a diagnosis of ADHD. Following getting my diagnosis and explaining that to people in work, because I was very open about it, I also learned that a lot of people in my workplace were neurodivergent in some way, and I'd never noticed it before. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that number. I think it's probably accurate.
Okay, so let's go there to your diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you were 31?
Yes.
Yep.
31.
Yep. Okay. And how did you feel?
A mix of emotions. At first, I felt excited, to be honest. Like, the first thought I had was I was excited. It explained a lot for me. And I was like, oh, it's not anxiety. Oh, it's not this. Oh, I can get medication. I can learn about this. Like, in my mind, in those first few weeks, my answer was, I'll get medicated and then it'll be fine, which was not true. Yes. I would come to learn. But that was what I first thought. And then it was kind of sadness. I became quite sad that it had never been recognized before, that I'd struggled through school, that I'd struggled through university, that my family or my friends hadn't recognized it in me, that a teacher had never recognized it in me. I went back and read my old school reports, and I think every single lesson said Rebecca makes silly mistakes, she doesn't listen, she misses her homework, she talks too much. Like, it was all of the traits of ADHD in every single report. But, you know, nothing was ever picked up because it was not recognized in girls back then. So yeah, a mixture of things. But then once I'd kind of learned more about it, I'd come to accept it. And then I started to be really proud of it. And I am really proud of it.
And you, the first person you told was kind of key, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because, you know, I'm interviewing the person as well that you told.
Yeah.
Like, let's just talk about that and how important that was.
Yeah. I don't even know if she knows this herself, but she'll soon find out. So the first person that I told, obviously aside from my partner, was Melissa, who is the CEO of ADHD Australia. And she was my colleague back in my previous workplace. She was my manager at the time. And I spoke to her and I was like, oh, I'm going for an assessment for ADHD. So I'm probably going to be off work. And if I'm a bit scatterbrained, this is why. And it was like a very panicked conversation. And she really settled me down and was like, Beck, it's fine. Like, she said, you know, it is completely fine. And she was like, I saw it in you as well. I didn't know if you knew or not already. And I was really shocked. I was like, what do you mean you saw it in me? I didn't see it in me. But obviously then she disclosed to me that she also had ADHD, and I guess that's why she could recognize it in me as well. And hearing that she also had ADHD and knowing where she was in her career and her life, and like, I saw her as this really put together, clever woman who was able to lead huge teams and make huge difference in the NDIS space and the disability space. And I was like, wow, like, she can do it. So can I. Like, you know, it was a really nice kind of feeling. I felt not as alone anymore. And it was a 5-minute conversation. It weren't like a groundbreaking therapy session. Like, it was just a 5-minute conversation where she just accepted, acted like it was perfectly fine and normal, which it was. Yes. And then, yeah, I reflected on it and was like, she's done so well, and she obviously can do all these amazing things with ADHD. So can anyone else.
Did she describe to you what it was she saw? So when she said, I thought that might be the case, what was she seeing?
I used to speak out a lot in meetings constantly. I was always I work really well under pressure. So I kind of that's when I thrive, when there's agency, I guess. So I think she'd saw that in me, and she'd seen, I have constant ideas, which I'm not afraid to blurt out, and sometimes over the top of someone else during a meeting, which, isn't very helpful. I think that they're probably the main things that she saw being in the relationship that we were, where she was my manager and she was kind of supervising me on different things. I remember one time having a supervision with her. She said, sometimes it seems like you think you're the cleverest person in the room. Do you think that that's true? And it was a really open, honest, hard-hitting question. And I said, no, of course I don't think that. There are plenty of clever people in the room. I absolutely do not think that. And she was like, no, I didn't think that you did, but the way that you present yourself sometimes makes it look like you do. So she gave me some tips, some really great tips in that, if I've got a thought, just write it down, because then when it's my turn to talk, I can. And that's the impulsivity side of ADHD. It's not that I'm, trying to take over someone else's thought pattern. It's, I have a thought, and if I don't get it out of my mind now, it'll be gone. It'll be lost forever. So I'd just say it. I would just blurt it out. Yeah, I would blurt it out. And I would spend meetings, when I had to wait for my turn, I would just constantly think about the thought I had in my head rather than truly listening to other people.
Got it.
So the simple tip that she gave me, write it down when it's your turn to speak. If you forgot it, it doesn't matter. It's written in front of you. And that saved meetings for me. It made them so much less stressful.
What a gift that question is. I talk a lot about leaders needing to be able to give very good, actionable feedback to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a crisis where people do not get good feedback, and there's a lot of research that says women in particular don't.
Mm-hmm.
But that is such a gift, that feedback.
It was. And I shared it with a friend, actually, who had received similar feedback from her manager. She's not ADHD,
Yes.
but she'd received similar feedback that she talks too much in meetings. And I told her that tip, and I was, and when, I shared it with people, they were like, wow, that's such a difficult thing to hear. And I was like, it wasn't a difficult thing to hear, not for me.
Yeah.
I loved hearing that, because I wanted someone to just say it how it is. And how am I going to grow if I don't know how other people perceive me?
Oh gosh, I could not be happier than hearing you say that. That's literally taking the words out of my mouth. That's amazing. Do you know, I understand that everyone's ADHD diagnosis is different.
Mm-hmm.
and can present with a whole range of different what do we say, traits, I think.
Traits. Yeah.
Right. And I often hear sometimes that can be referred to like superpowers as well. Is that a concept that you're comfortable with? Tell me about that.
Yeah and no. So yeah, I see that all the time. I see it about autism as well, and many of the neurodivergencies. Autism is a superpower, ADHD is a superpower, and I think that can be really damaging to people who are really struggling with their diagnosis, or are struggling with getting to grips with holding, with building the skills that they need. So I don't think that ADHD is a superpower. I think it can be at times if you learn how to harness it. So if you learn how to harness it, yes, it can be a superpower, but it's not always a superpower. And I definitely need people around me and good strategies and good skills to be able to maintain that idea that it's a superpower. And there are definitely times when it feels like the world is against me, or the world isn't made for me or made for my brain. But there are also times when I'm like, wow, this is so easy. I can do this. My ADHD brain is allowing me to work two people's jobs, or, come up with new ideas that are out of the box, and come up with them quickly, and work with urgency, and do 3 days worth of work in a day, hyper focus on a new hobby, and learn how to, for example, I learned how to do embroidery designs within a week. And, all of those things, if you're excited about it, if you can harness it, yes, it can be a superpower. But there are also days when, like I said, I can't even put my own washing away. So it depends. Yeah.
I asked you a question when you and I first met, and as I led with, I think it's it's an ignorant question in terms of there's a room for me to learn, right? But the question I asked you is, how do you kind of work out the difference between, well, what's ADHD and part of that diagnosis, and what's personality, like who you are?
Yeah. I struggled with this question for a long time, and it's a question that so many people ask, right? Like when I very first got diagnosed, I Googled everything about myself. I was like, is this a symptom of ADHD? Is everything that happened? I then was like, oh, it's because of ADHD. I've lost my keys because it's ADHD. I've slept in too late because of ADHD. All those different things. Or I talk too much. I talk about myself, impulsive, all of that stuff. And I couldn't really find an answer between what is ADHD and what is my personality. And now I'm a few years into this diagnosis and I've learned a lot about it. I think there isn't a separation between my personality and my ADHD. My brain is different. It is functionally different. The way that it moves neurotransmitters around is different. The growth of it, even in the development stages of childhood, is different. On a brain scan, it will look different to a neurotypical brain. So I can't say what is my personality and what is ADHD because I am ADHD.
Yes.
I heard someone recently describe ADHD versus neurotypical as just different operating systems. So it's like Mac versus Windows, or it's like an iPhone versus an Android system. And it's not that, one is better or worse. It's just a different operating system that requires different input.
Yeah.
And, may have different output. So I really liked that analogy because it helped me to, explain kind of that question you've just asked of, it's not that part of me is neurotypical and other parts of me have these ADHD traits. It's that my whole system is ADHD. So my whole system requires different inputs and will give different outputs. Yeah. And yes, some of those are similar to people with a neurotypical brain. Everyone loses their keys. Everyone sleeps in now and again. I guess the difference is in the chronic everydayness of it. It's constant for people with ADHD.
Thank you for so generously stepping in and answering that question. I really appreciate it. You shared earlier that you were pretty open from the start in terms of your diagnosis.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case for most people, or do you tell, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's the case for most people, and I can definitely understand why. For me, I thought it was necessary to be open. I'm an open book anyway. I'm always someone who overshares, generally. I always have been. But when it came to me having the diagnosis of ADHD, I felt like I had to share it with everyone because I worked in a space where I was advocating for neurodivergent people anyway. It's not something to be ashamed of. So I said it proudly to everyone. And I can see why people don't share it as well, because I even had some people say to me like, oh, are you going to share it with your team at work, because won't they see it as you just making excuses for if you don't get stuff done on time, or, if you're late for work, or they might think that you're using it as an excuse and that you need these extra, accommodations at work. And I said like, no, I don't think that's the case. Thankfully, I worked in a space that was very neuro-inclusive and that was very kind of supportive anyway. So no, I didn't think that it was something I should hide away, but I can see that other people would be scared to share that. Even sharing it with my family, they're so supportive of it now, but at first they were like, what? Like, are you sure? Are you sure it's not just anxiety? And I've spoken to all them since, and they all, most of the women in my family also show traits of ADHD. None of them are diagnosed, but apart from my younger siblings, some of my siblings. But I think everyone's getting to a point now where they're accepting we're probably all a little bit neurospicy. But there was a lot of questions at first, and it can be overwhelming when you don't understand it yourself to explain it to people.
Yes. Is there a stigma attached to it?
I think it's getting better.
Yeah.
I do think it's getting better. I think it's kind of going through that pendulum of maybe going too far the other way of ADHD is always a superpower, and then it's not realizing that sometimes we actually need accommodations, and some people with ADHD actually can't hold down a job, or, you know, the statistics of even scary things like people with ADHD have a lower life expectancy than neurotypical people for myriads of reasons. There's comorbid kind of conditions that come with it sometimes, and then there's also just dangerous behavior that can sometimes happen, impulsivity, all of that kind of stuff. There's higher addiction rates and things like that.
Okay.
So yeah, there is definitely still a stigma attached to it, but I do think that it is getting better. I think people are starting to see that it's more prevalent and understand that it's not necessarily a bad thing to have someone with ADHD in your company, for example. It's something that you can, like I said, you know, you can harness that superpower and use those employees in a way that you may not be able to kind of support, in a way that you may not be able to work with the people who are neurotypical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, well, let's go there, Beck, in terms of, you know, what do you think, how do leaders establish an environment that kind of truly welcomes diversity? What do you wish leaders knew, you know, or did?
Yeah, I think for me personally, the way that I work with my team is I don't assume anything about them. I don't assume whether they have ADHD or not. I might see similar traits. I might see that, you know, they struggle in certain ways that I can identify with, or thrive in ways that I either do or don't identify with. And I treat everyone the same. And that's by just kind of fostering inclusivity by asking a question like what you asked me earlier. Is there anything I can do to make this easier for you? Or, you know, is there, like, what space do you work best in? Do you prefer a quiet space or a thriving space? Do you need to have your instructions verbally, or do you prefer them in email? When you're in a meeting, how would you like to contribute? How would you like to be given feedback? Like, just ask the open question. It doesn't have to be, oh, you have ADHD, so you have sensory needs, so you need a quiet space and headphones and some fairy lights. It's not like that.
Yeah.
Everyone is different. So whether they're neurotypical, ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, whatever, a mobility issue, everyone has different needs, and leaders just need to recognize that if you can accommodate those different needs for whatever reason it may be, then you're going to get the best from people. You're going to help them to thrive. It's literally that simple.
Practical leadership advice is what we're really
Yes.
what we're really hearing, right? So not rocket science.
It's really not. And, you know, I think another thing with ADHD in particular with ADHD women, I think it would be helpful if leaders recognized, you know, there has, for the majority of women with ADHD, probably been a long period of struggle where, you know, they told themselves and the world told them that they are lazy, that they are silly, they are broken, they are messy, and all of those kinds of things, chaotic. And if we tell ourselves that story and that's affirmed through feedback and things like that, it's just going to make us struggle more. Yeah. So I think people themselves can help. You can help yourself as an employee or by, you know, a friend or whatever, to accept that you're not those things. Stop telling yourself that story. Stop telling yourself you're lazy and you're broken. And, you know, if you make a mistake at work, or if you do something wrong, or you've missed a deadline or whatever it may be, it's just be open about that. Don't dwell on it. Just admit, like, I actually really struggle with times. I struggle with time organization. Can you help me support, like, do that? Is there maybe a system I can use that we can download that will help me with organizing my deadlines? Is there a project management tool that we can use? Could you send me an email reminder 3 days before something is due? Like, you know, just ask for those things that you need when you recognize that you've struggled because of something that may be to do with your ADHD. And then I think once people learn how you best work, then that's when you thrive. And, you know, once the manager learns that all they need to do is send you an email maybe to remind you of something, then you thrive. Like, for example, I recently was just struggling to get started on a project that I had to do. I had all the ideas in my head. I knew exactly what I needed to do, but I just couldn't sit down and get it done. So deadline's looming. So I emailed my manager and I told her, she's aware I have an ADHD diagnosis. Many other people in my organization do. And I said to her, like, I'm just really struggling to actually put the pen to paper and get started. I don't know where to begin. Like in ADHD, we often have a million thoughts going on at once. It's like lots of traffic lanes merging into one traffic lane and you just can't actually get through. So she sat with me, 15-minute conversation. All she did was say, okay, let's write down all the things you need to do and now let's put them in order. So I wrote all the things down I needed to do. And she said, why don't you start with this thing, then do this thing, and then this thing? And that simple conversation, I was like, yep, that's what I was thinking. Yes, that's what I was thinking. It wasn't that it was new information to me or new advice. It's just sometimes it's nice to speak it out loud and have someone else help you organize your thoughts, write it down in order and get it done. So it's just practical strategies.
So, well, and you've mentioned a couple there. What would you, like, are there any other practical strategies you would call out to people who, have recently been diagnosed or otherwise?
Yeah. In my personal life, I guess. So, I went through that period of acceptance. I learned to accept my brain is different. I need different things to help me thrive. And now that I've accepted it, I've stopped trying to make my home, for example, just fit I've stopped trying to make my brain fit my home that was designed for a neurotypical person. So, for example, my fridge, I have on the front of my fridge every single thing that is in my fridge written down so that I can say, what I can have for a snack. If I just opened my fridge, I'd be like, there's nothing there, I don't know what to do, but there's actually carrots and hummus, or I could have cheese and crackers or whatever it may be. It's all written down what snacks I can make so that when I open my fridge, I can do that really easily, because we have like object permanence is something we struggle with, and kind of that executive functioning of just starting the thing. It's like, oh, it's too difficult, too overwhelming. I know that out of sight, out of mind is a real thing for me. So I have, when I'm getting ready to go to work in the morning, or I have to go to the gym or whatever it may be, everything goes in a pile, and that pile goes right in front of the front door. And I mean everything. So like a bottle of water, my keys, anything I need for that day. I've learned to accept that I can't just go, oh, remember to take your keys in the morning, or, oh, remember you need your headphones tomorrow for the gym. I won't remember it when I wake up in the morning. It will not happen. So every single item that I need goes in a pile in front of the front door, and I get dressed by the front door. It sounds crazy, but that's what helps me.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me is gamification. So that's the idea that you turn things you don't like into a game in your life. So whether that's something at work, whether it's something at home, something that you need to get done, I think it's a good idea to support your dopamine-driven brain to have a reward at the end of it and make it somewhat of a challenge. We are driven by challenge. We are driven by urgency. We seek that dopamine thrill. So make your mundane chores and your mundane tasks into something that's exciting. So something simple me and my partner do. Like I've said a few times, I struggle with chores. He will say, okay, let's write down 3 songs, or we're going to write down 5 songs. And then within that 3 to 5 song time frame, I have to get X, Y, and Z done. So it's like, okay, the dishes need doing, the washing needs to be hung up, and the beds need making. So do you think you can do it in 3 songs? I'll choose the 3 songs and I'll try and beat myself, and it works every single time. And it sounds silly, right? It's like childish, but it works.
Yeah.
It works. And I do the same in work as well. Like I'll set myself a timer and I'll bet myself that I can't get things done in that time frame. And I always can once I get started. So it doesn't always work. Sometimes it's just too hard to get started. But roping in other people to hold you accountable, gamifying things, giving yourself a reward at the end, and creating a sense of urgency, even if there isn't one, can be really, really effective for people with ADHD.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that your background as a behavioural analyst was really what gave you the clues into this. It's like, why am I not using my skills on myself?
Yeah. I really struggled with the medication. I mean, it can be amazing and it's a personal preference, you know, it quietens down my mind. It definitely helped me focus and just get stuff done as the thought entered my head.
Yes.
But I really struggled with the time when it wore off. And so for me, it wasn't good. And then I just thought, I literally help people all day, every day to build skills to help them thrive in their life. Why am I not doing that on my own to myself? So I taught everyone around me, like my partner, my friends, my family, exactly how I needed that support. And they jumped right in and helped me with it.
And your partners come to Australia with you, right?
Yeah, we moved together.
Yeah, fantastic, amazing. So, gosh, I love our conversation, and I'm so grateful for you agreeing to kind of join the series and, you know, stay as open as you are, which I know helps so many people. Can I ask you, as I ask everyone in my podcast, the final question is, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you? So the name of our podcast. And do you think brave feminine leadership needs to change?
What it means to me is, for me, being brave is being vulnerable. So, you know, talking about all these things I have with you today, I'm a leader. I don't want people to think that I can't do X, Y, and Z. No, like, just throw it out the window. Everyone is human. If you want to be brave, you need to be vulnerable. If you want to be brave, you need to accept who you are and what you need. So I think that, to me, that's what brave feminine leadership is. It's accepting that you're a woman, that you may already be at some sort of disadvantage being in the leadership field. Add ADHD to that, it might add another layer of disadvantage. But if you can, you know, harness it as the superpower, like we've said, and you can accept it and you can advocate for yourself, that's the brave part. And that's how we're going to move forward, I think, as women in leadership, is just accept what you need and be be a radical advocate for it for yourself. I think that will then allow you to lead by example, show other people that vulnerability isn't necessarily a bad thing, that there are companies out there or people out there that will support you and support the way that your brain works, because they can see that there is so much potential in the ideas that you have and the way that you can lead a team. Do I think it needs to change? Yes, kind of. You know, I think there needs to be more women in leadership. I think there needs to be more acceptance outside of our feminine groups and outside of our ADHD advocacy and outside of all the other groups that advocate for these things. There needs to be acceptance in the general population that women are good in leadership and that women do have a lot to offer, and that different neurodivergent populations also have a lot to offer, and it very much depends on what you need for your company. But we shouldn't be forgotten about, I guess.
Beck, amazing. Thank you. I loved your response to that. So thank you again for being part of our conversation. It's just been such a pleasure having the chance to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been amazing being on. Thank you so much for the opportunity.